Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very, very special edition of the Airbyte community call. This is going to be a really cool, transparent dive into our Series B. So our co-founders here, John and Michel, have graciously decided to show up for our community call, and it's really exciting to have both of them here. They have been essentially the masterminds behind how we raised our Series B, and they're going to go into all of the details behind how they did that today. Now, before I hand it off to them, please ask your questions in the questions tab or in the chat, and we're going to basically hold those off, and then at the end or along the way, when it makes sense, we're going to be answering your questions. So please, if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to put it in the chat. And it's going to be really exciting. So without further ado, let me hand it off to them. John and Michel, take it away.
Thanks, Abby. So I'll share my screen so we can share with you the pitch deck we actually showed, that we pitched to the investors. Can you all see my screen? Is it good?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. And we shall let you start.
Yep. So hi, everyone. So one thing that is interesting about when you're pitching is depending on the investor, sometimes they want to go down all the slides. Sometimes they already are prepared with questions. And at that point, like that becomes more of a conversation and you switch from one slide to the next. But here what we've decided is to just go through the story we had in mind when we created these slides. And yeah, let's get started. So hi, so we're John and Michel, we're the co-founder of Airbyte, and Airbyte is the next standard for everything related to data integration. Next slide, John. So when you're thinking about the data space today, you see that we are in a new generation of how companies and organizations are approaching data, and that has been led by all the modern data warehouse like BigQuery, Snowflake, Redshift, etc., etc. And what you realize is that there are a few pieces that are already very mature or that are becoming the standard. And you have others that are left and that are still require a lot of improvement to find a leader there. And the main one that we're focusing on is really everything that is related to data movement. So getting data into this modern data warehouse and getting data out of this data warehouse. So you see there's already a few players, but when you're looking at these players, John, can you go to the next slide?
Just as a quick thing, can we full screen the presentation?
So just so you know, we generally don't do that because we can jump easily from slide to slides. So that's why we don't do it.
No worries. Chat was just asking.
Yeah. And so when you're looking at the existing space for everything that is related to data movement, focusing on ELT first, you see that existing solution generally focus on one category of sources. What we've done is we've divided all the sources, all the places where you can have data in three categories. First one is all the common APIs, meaning everything that is top of mind when you're thinking about an API. Then there is everything that is considered long tail, which is either it's a localized service or it's a service that is not that commonly used, or it's also an existing service that is very popular, but that you want to extract data from in a very different way. So that's what we call long tail and custom. And the other one are the high scale, where you have a lot of data. So databases, files, etc., etc. And when you look at existing services, they really focus on common APIs, meaning that they generally stop or plateau in terms of the number of integration at around 170 connectors. But I mean, we're all in the data space. We all know that we have way more than 170 places where we can get data from. And that is a problem for this solution, because now it means that you need to have someone inside your team to actually build this custom, this long tail, this high scale connectors. The other piece, yes, is they cannot handle custom use cases. if, for example, you're extracting data from Salesforce, but you need a new channel of data or a new stream of data that is not supporting by the existing connector, then you don't have a choice. You need to implement your own Salesforce connector. And the other problem is really the counter-productive pricing that is row-based. And at that point, what we see, and we have a lot of people that are coming to Airbyte because they are using this existing solution, and they hit a point where they have to make the choice between using a solution that has an appropriate pricing model or just building this solution internally, because they cannot justify the cost of replicating a billion or million rows database. And that's what we're doing basically with Airbyte. We're a unified data integration platform. So what we're really focusing on is building the platform and getting the tools to our community and to our team to actually expand the catalog of places where you can have data, where you can get data from or push data to. And our goal by the end of 2022 is to have above 500 new connectors, and we're going to be enabling that even more with our participative model. So generally at that point in the presentation, when we talk to investors, we present the participative model if they're interested. John, do you want to switch to it? And that's one of the reasons why we like to keep the slides open and not full screen. So when we're thinking about the participative model, it's about how can we align incentives of the community, of our contributors and of the Airbyte teams and the users to ensure that we never have stalled connectors. And the way we've announced it a few months ago is we are going to do a rev share model with our contributors, whether they are individual contributors, whether they are data agencies, or whether they are vendors, on the popularity and the success of their connectors. And that is one way for us to really ensure that we always provide the highest quality connectors over the long run, because we all know it. Building a connector is moderately hard, but maintaining is where all the problem is. So that's where we really want to innovate in terms of how we approach the maintenance of these connectors. John, can you go back to number 4? Perfect. And a lot of the focus is really on the extensibility of the platform, because we really want to make sure that every one of your data integration need is addressed by one platform. And that's why we created the CDK. That's why we created a lot of the tooling to allow people to very, very quickly create new connectors or extend existing connector or modify existing connector. The other part is about how do we think about pricing. So when you're thinking data integration, it's infrastructure. It means that we want to ensure that we follow what other pieces of data infrastructure are actually doing for pricing. And we'll talk more about it in the future, but want to make sure that we can address small scale use cases as well as high scale use cases. And we are at that point, what we're going for is really a consumption model, which is very similar to what data warehouses are also doing. Next slide, John. And in general, like between all these slides, we always take a little pause. Sometimes John will add something if he wants to. We also ask investors if they need any more information about every one of these slides. And here it's really about talking about the audience of Airbyte. When you're thinking about data integration, it's a problem for two parts of the company. The first one, which is people who are actually building the data platform, so getting the data into the company, and the other one, which is about who is actually leveraging that data to extract insights. Sometimes it's the same team, sometimes it's different teams. And when we built Airbyte, we really thought of Airbyte as an enabler for data teams. So you don't have to spend time on building connector, and you can actually spend time on quality. You can spend time on a lot of other domain of the data, and your responsibility becomes just about getting Airbyte into your company and exposing Airbyte to the other team so that you can enable your data analyst, your analytics engineer to actually be able to create all this data pipeline. So it's really built with these two like producer and consumer in mind. So data analyst, data scientist. So very like ease of use, having a UI, easy configuration. And on the other side, like data engineer and engineers, which is about maintenance, creating new connectors, interacting with the system through an API. And that's really what we have in mind when we're building Airbyte. John, I hand it off to you.
Yep, and I would just like to add, that the problems that Michel has exposed here is actually true as well for the other types of data integration, other use cases like reverse TL or streaming. It's exactly the same problem. So then what we show is really what we've been up to in the last 16 months. And first, about the velocity of the team. We started in end of July 2020, and now when you see the black line, which is the number of connectors on the platform, we actually are at 164 today. And you can see that we announced the participative model around like Q4 and a bit here. And you see the, uptick from the contributors. So this is very encouraging to us because right now the team is mostly focusing on reliability and quality of connectors while enabling the contributors to really build the new connectors. So we see the switch in this in here, and that's how we can really achieve 500 high quality connectors. Then the next thing we display is really about the adoption, and we have today more than 60,000 companies that have deployed. What is interesting to us is really the growth in terms of deployments per month. We're today at 2,500, and we were like 6 times less like 9 months ago. And so this keeps growing every month. And out of the 16,000 companies that have deployed Airbyte, we've got 10,000 of them at least that have synced data with us successfully. So as you've seen, we don't display some data because, we don't know if we have the rights to do so publicly. So that's why sometimes we see logos or these kind of things. Typically, out of these 10,000 companies, we have a large number and actually a growing number. You can see the growth rate. What is interesting is the growth rate that is higher for those prod users. We call a prod user somebody that syncs data more than once on a daily basis and over several weeks. And this growth, what is interesting to investors here is typically that this growth rate is higher. So the ratio between prod users and what we call activated users is just growing. And another validation is actually the data usage across the user base. You can see that per activated user, we have a significant growth rate month over month, and even more obviously across the user base. And this is possibly the most important slide. It's really about the community. We're comparing here Airbyte with Grouparo, which is open source reverse TL, RudderStack, which is open source segment, and Meltano, who's more open source CLT like us, but moving a bit more towards orchestration right now for data pipelines. And the way you see the different growth rate, which is completely different. One way we explain how the growth rate of code contributors is completely different between Airbyte and the others is that our user community has a strong overlap with our contributor community. At the very beginning of Airbyte, we were wondering, actually, Michel and me, we were wondering if we should go do an open source segment, but we were never convinced that this was the right first step because we couldn't make the link between the user community and the developer community. And so what happens is our users are data engineers and data analysts, as Michel said. So there's a strong overlap. But when you look at reverse ETL and segments use case, the users are mostly product, customer success, marketing, sales. It's not data engineers. And that's why they will have a very hard time at building a contributor community. And what is interesting to us is that when we discuss with our community, they're also interested in the reverse ETL and streaming use case. Some of them actually ask us, okay, can we build connectors typically for Salesforce as a destination? So this is something that we have on the roadmap for 2022. We will enable like the community to build reverse ETL connectors, same for streaming. And so that means in the end that we will, as we are the only ones with the community and the ones that really develop this community, and which we're in the end the only community powered company here. At that point, we are the only ones able to address the long tail of connectors and to really solve the problem of data integration. And that's on this slide that we start to expose the whole vision. ELT for Airbyte is only a first step. We want to go beyond we want to go at powering all data movement. Michel, can you put yourself in mute? Yes, thanks.
Yep, my bad.
And one slide that is very important to share as well is the ecosystem, because you cannot become a standard if the ecosystem really doesn't adopt you as a standard. So that's where we start featuring, where we start being featured on marketplace, or where we're going to be featured in marketplace based on discussions we have, where also we have companies that are starting to build their products on top of our connectors. And that is very important, because in the end, the SLAs they provide to their customers depend on our SLAs, so there will be strong contributors as well. And that's where you see the community powered aspect of it, where it's not, Airbyte is not a company, it's more, well, it is a company, but it's a community of companies and individuals that will try to solve data integration at their own data integration. So that's when we start also talking about Airbyte Cloud. Our first goal here is to capture a certain amount of the spend on warehouses with ELT, because we're starting with ELT today. And so the intent, so how we're going to do this is with Airbyte Cloud. Our philosophy for Airbyte Cloud and on premium features versus open source features. Anything that helps to move data, and at that point should be open source. Anything that is useful to a team or a company will be in cloud. So that means cloud hosting and management, obviously, but also user access management will be there. Anything that is monitoring, auditoring, SSO, SML, these kind of features. And obviously, well, we talk also a bit at that point about the credit-based model based on compute, and how actually it re-enables the use case of database replication. And at the time, we actually launched Airbyte Cloud as a soft launch in beta, in invite only. That's when we start communicating about the number of companies in the waitlist and the discussions we currently have. So it's with the best logos we have, and how much are we talking about in yearly, so that they have some kind of average like ACV, annual contract value. And that can give them, okay, what is the size of the opportunity for this ELT? Michel, I'll let you take over.
Yes. And so one thing that has been really a key driver for Airbyte was the bottom-up adoption within a team and organization. And as we're launching cloud, we want to reproduce a very similar motion. So meaning having very, very broad, very large footprints into companies. And when we're thinking about the go-to-market there, it's really about creating a product-led growth motion. So how can we create how can we optimize the onboarding? How can we optimize the product experience? How can we optimize bringing the documentation when needed, etc., so that people can really self-serve into the Airbyte platform? So to an extent, it's about reproducing what we've been successful at doing with the open source product. And then it's about looking at a threshold in which we decide, do we let people to just self-serve, or can we also bring a salesperson into the conversation? And when we were having this conversation, we're really bootstrapping the go-to-market to just streamline this process. And at that time, we were thinking about, if the deal is over 10K, then we bring a salesperson into the conversation. That also allows us to get people to pre-buy potentially more credits, to have discounts on their credits. And if it's under 10K, then we let people self-serve and they have access to our technical support if they encounter any issue. It's really about removing friction and getting a very seamless onboarding. Work in progress is going to be a very long iteration process. There are a lot of companies that have done it in the past, and we're going to be going through a very similar motion. And then we talk about the team that we've built, and also what are the different roles that we're looking for today. And yeah, at that time we had just hired Adam, our head of sales. We had just hired Erica, head of technical support. So and he started at that time as well. So just to give a sense of what the team looks like and where we are focusing our effort. Yeah. Obviously, product and engineering and go to market. And then on the next step, we talk about where we are going and how we're thinking about the milestone for the product and how do we see our ambition in terms of growing the team. So we start by just talking about what is our North Star in 2022 and 2023. It's about becoming a ubiquitous, reliable integration standard. And reliable means it's a part of your data infrastructure. It has to work. Data integration always fails, to be clear, but it's about building a resilient system that allows your team to be efficient and to trust the data that they have. Ubiquitous is about having access to data wherever it is, whether it's a SaaS service, whether it's an external database, whether it's an external file, or whether it's your own internal security sensitive data. Ubiquitous is about having the ability to pull data wherever it is. And we've actually started with the first step, which we call connectivity, which is about providing the tool, providing the framework to build the long tail of connector, providing the necessary tools as well for having the ability to extend these connectors. And then it's also about database replication, which is like high scale use cases, and offer that with a scalable pricing so that you can really use Airbyte as your unified platform. Then it's more about like the localization. Like how can I move data within places where you have local regulation in place, like GDPR, CCPA? How can you ensure that you're doing it in the right way, and also that you can ensure that your data is not going in a place where it should not go? Another part is about accessing secure data in a safe way. So that's when we're looking at private VPC and hybrid, which is how can we actually separate the control plane and the data plane so that your data movement actually only runs within your own organization and there is no third party that has access to it. That's something that is key for a lot of our open source users, and that's why they are really running Airbyte in production today, which is they want to do the data replications as they cannot let a third party have access to this data. So they just install us into their infrastructure. And then the third step is about the new types of data integration. Like how can we enable like pushing data from warehouse where you've probably joined your data with other data sets where you've enriched this data, and how do you actually push it back to APIs or to other services? And then it's about real-time ingestion. Like how can we make sure that we can have access to ephemeral data coming in and make sure that it gets properly ingested into your system. And these are really about building the physical pipes. And then it's about what kind of intelligence that can we put on top of these pipes, whether it's around data quality, privacy, compliance, data discovery. And this can be either things that we build ourselves, or it can be about other products that we partner with that can now be activated within the Airbyte platform. And we talked then about our next milestone in terms of predicted revenue, because one thing that we've done with the team that was a very interesting exercise is thinking about a very very ambitious milestone and trying to go top down from what should the team look like to support this new milestone. And I think it really helps to go through that exercise, because it allows you to see where you might have structural problems as you're growing your team quickly. So for us, it was, we need to invest more into our recruiting team. We need to invest more into our people ops team. As are a few of these instances that we've detected and that we're prioritizing in terms of recruiting today. And the goal is to be at 300 employees when we hit that milestone, to have above 1,000 different connectors, some maintained by us and some maintained by the community with the contribution model, and to get to 100K deployment of open source and specific number of cloud customers. And this is really to show the the ambition of the team and where we're going and what we've already proven with the open source. And yeah, and after that we talk about, so at the time, yes, we were really looking at what if we should be raising. Our goal was really to raise in 2022, but at the same time there was also this massive community adoption. So going through the exercise of how big do we want the team to be and what are our milestones, having the ability to raise now was also a big enabler for us and for the team. And so that's why we really went through that process, and that's where we're at. And we have a few other slides, but generally we don't show them unless people ask very, very specific questions. I think the one that people mostly looked at was the number 23, which is about the contribution model.
The participative model, yeah.
Okay, so I think we're going to be getting into Q&A now. There's a lot of questions, so I'm going to be going through and picking the ones that people have uploaded the most first, and we'll try to get to everyone's question. We'll create a thread in the Airbyte Slack if we don't get to anyone's question, because I really want the founders to be able to answer everyone's question here. So let's just go ahead and get started. So we have Manish, who asks, how do you get the stats of 16K companies? Do you track the installations of your open source solution?
Yes,
deployment.
So we have telemetry. Yeah.
We have telemetry, so you can anonymize or remove them. Yeah, go on, Michel.
No, there is a bit of a lag, so it's hard to know. Yeah, go ahead, John.
So yeah, we have some telemetry. When you deploy it, you can choose whether you want to anonymize the data, these kind of things. So you have the options, you have control of that. But when you deploy it, we have this data.
Awesome. So next question, Emilio asks.
It's actually an understatement, because if you put it behind firewall, we don't know. So 16K is at least 16K. It's what we can see. And even 10K, every number is actually an understatement, but that's the only number we can communicate.
Yeah, and also it's behind the firewall. It's just we have in our documentation how you can just completely disable all the telemetry. So
cool, and I can add a link to the doc for that. Emilio asks, if an individual contributor builds a connector and a year later the API specs for that connector changes, will Airbyte update the connector to keep working? If the individual contributor has moved on, will my integration break? How does a new contributor take over an abandoned connector?
Yeah, that's exactly why we built the contribution model, is to avoid this kind of situation, which is you might be an individual contributor that has been working on it, and maybe you're changing job, but you still have an incentive to maintaining it. Now, if you don't want to maintain it, maybe someone is going to create a new version of the connector, is going to take over that connector, and we'll have access then to the rev share that we get from cloud. But that is exactly the point of it, is making sure that we never end up with stale connectors.
Cool. So early on in the chat, Ranjan asks, will the revenue model include royalties based on usage apart from the SLA?
And you mean the participative model?
I believe this is referring to the participative model. Yeah.
So it will depend on the SLA you provide. Like the higher, the more percentage you get of revenues. So we need still to define how much percentage. But let's say if it's a low quality one, you will get a lot less than if it's a high quality one. So that you are incentivized at building fully featured to have more users and high quality connectors. And for us, that's the only way you can really commoditize data integration.
Cool. Shacher asks, what did you do differently than current ETLs that enabled this incredible growth rate?
I think it's about the control you have and also the promise and the tooling that you have around the long tail. So first of all, you have, as I mentioned before, connectors are going to break. That's the nature of connectors because you always rely on an external service that you have no control on. They might change the APIs, they might change something that is going to break your connectors. And when you rely on that data, the worst thing that can happen to you is that you have no control about how you can fix it. And that's why sometimes people just do it internally. With open source, you have this power. And you also have the power that if there is a missing connector, there is a connector that doesn't work, you just can build it or tune it to your own need. And it doesn't have to go through a lot of product prioritization, engineering prioritization processes from within a company. And I mean, you know, Charles wrote an article not so long ago about it's just a little script, which is exactly what connectors look like at the beginning. It's just a little script, but then it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And what we want is to solve the bigger piece, which is how do you do orchestration? How do you do monitoring? How do you, everything that is about operating a connector so that you can either get an out-of-the-box connector that works, or you only focus on building the value of the connector, which is just extracting the data or pushing the data somewhere.
Cool. A bunch of people wanted this question answered from chat. Sarthak asks, how are you going about experimenting with pricing? What led to the 10K figure to segregate self-serve and enterprise?
Good question. So the 10K, we're still iterating. So that's why this is something we'll learn with time, with iteration. And the goal is really to maximize the self-serve, optimize self-serve, because that's, well, better for our audience. And because people don't want to talk to sales. So the more we do without sales, the better. And so we'll see, but some people will always need to talk to sales. So that's what we need to identify today. So this is something that yeah, it's not written in the wall. It's something that we try to iterate, but we will iterate on always.
Like everything related to PLG, to self-serve, to sales, it's a continuous process. You need to iterate. Your audience might change. You might start having more and more like higher deal customer coming through. So you need to adjust, but you need to start with a baseline, and 10K was our baseline, is our baseline today.
Cool. How did you convince Accel to lead your seed round? What traction did you have back then compared to now?
So actually we shared our seed deck. We shared our seed deck and Series A deck. So if you go on our blog and go our story, you'll find the seed deck. So you'll see the traction we had. But at the time we had, I think, like 300 companies, but we already saw the exponential, but not at the same scale at all. So, but definitely was a buying on the vision and the early indicators.
So there's a quick clarification about the pitch deck. Do you literally leave XM when sending your pitch deck, or do you set the actual value?
No.
So
we just remove numbers and logos from for the presentation.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So yeah, we unfortunately there are some numbers and things that we can't communicate. So we're trying to be as transparent as we can, as we've always been doing. But sometimes we can't, and this is a number we can't, unfortunately.
Edward asks a fun question. How many no's did you guys land to get the one yes?
How many
We were
sorry?
very focused. Yeah, we were very focused on the partners that we talked to. So first of all, it was mostly partners that already knew about Airbyte, that we had a pre-existing relationship with. I mean, I don't know how many no's we got, but it was definitely a lot of yeses.
Yeah.
But we tried to be very focused. You just had a very small list of people of VCs and investors we wanted to talk to.
So if you want, like on seed for the seed, we talked to 45, and Accel was at 42nd. On the Series A, we talked to 1, just benchmark. So that was the easiest, I guess, process ever. But still, yeah, it was a long process because we had to build a relationship. But still, we only talked to them. And this one, I think it was about a dozen, 10, something like this. But we focused, yeah. So not a lot.
Here's an interesting one. Why are you raising in December when you already raised in May?
That's a good question.
So let's say when we discussed with Michel, it was we will be only interested to raise if we raise at the same conditions that we wanted to raise for Series B. Initially, we wanted to raise Series B at end of 2022. But if it's the same conditions with the right partners, the partners we wanted for Series B, then we should do it now. And the reason is, well, it helps on recruiting a lot. People might say no sometimes because they feel that we're only a Series A company, and this is no longer the case. And we see that already now. Second, well, it puts a spotlight and it helps on revenues and also on brand perception. Like we have some companies that didn't want to use the technology yet because we were still a Series A company. So in the end, it helps every step of the way. So let's say where we would be in mid-2023 if we raised with our Series B end of 2022 or end of 2021, I would say we would be a much better place if we raised in the end of 2021.
Yeah, and the other thing is about like building the organization. I mean, our milestone goal, they are the same whether we raise the Series B in 2021 or in 2022. And at that point, having the capital to actually execute on our vision and on the organization building, it removes a lot of risk from how we think about it. So we can just focus on building the best product and building the best team now.
And in the end, this is very beneficial to the community because we'll be able to reach 100 engineers in the team and to build a better product faster. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you see this kind of ties into that? How do you see the challenge scaling from 30 to 300 people? How will that affect how Airbyte runs today?
It is going to be, it's as always when companies scale, it is challenging. I think at that point is, one thing we've done very early on with the team was writing down how we're thinking about the company values and how, like, what kind of individual we want to bring into the team. And at that point, it's just, we should not compromise on who we bring in just for the sake of growing fast and making sure also that we build the right infrastructure. So that's what we were saying before, which is we want to make sure that we have the best support for the new people that are coming in. We have the best onboarding for new people joining the company, the best experience as you start. And I think if we put the right infrastructure and we stay true to our value, it will. I don't want to be over optimistic. It will be a mess sometimes. It is normal, but we'll be ready to accommodate it.
And I feel also, I would just add that we were also focusing on bringing in a lot of senior roles and team leads so that in the end you have many swim lanes, like because they would be able to grow their own team. And that means that if you have many people growing their own team, it makes it easier to scale.
And one thing that is also important is like the first people that we've also brought into the company, they are also part of being the foundation because they are setting the example for like people that are coming in. And that creates a very, very solid foundation. And now new people are going to be looking at what were people that joined earlier, how are they doing, what do they do, how do they behave, how do they handle this kind of situation. So at that point, it's just about leading by example for the people that have been with us early.
So I'm going to combine two questions here that follow up from that. Sergio asks, any company that you have as a reference that you'd like to become? Do you think Databricks and its massive enterprise adoption could be an immediate threat to your business? And then I'm going to combine that with, how do you see Airbyte 5 years from now? So, yeah.
So for the question about Databricks, there is no, sorry. No, there is. It's not a threat. It's a partner. Like everybody who works on the compute side of data is a partner, because if you have a compute engine, what you need is you need to have data to compute. So at that point, because we're really focusing on addressing the long tail, I mean, it's going to be very hard for another company to address the long tail. It's a full company and community work to do it, and at that point, it's really more partnership, whether it's with like BigQuery, Snowflake. I mean, it's about getting data to be processed by this platform. So not a threat.
And honestly, Databricks has no interest in doing a data integration based on discussions we have with them, because it's a hard problem. And if you see somebody that like has a community behind them, it's going to be too hard to catch up. So in any case, they're not interested to do that. Same for Snowflake, by the way. And the other question is about the company. Where do we see it in 5 years? Do you want to reply, Michel?
Yeah, I mean, it's just we are the standard for moving data. Like when you start operating your data infrastructure in your company, whether you're starting one, whether you're migrating to a new one, the problem that we'll always have is about how do I get data in, and Airbyte should be there to be basically your standard to do it. I mean, obviously, we want to have a very solid revenue growth, so we can continue to improve on the product, improve the experience for our community. But it's really about, let's grow, let's become the standard. We have a huge surface area. I mean, today, every single company in the world is becoming a data company. Like whether it's a mom and shop store, they need to know how data is flowing. They need to understand like like what they need to be buying to accommodate the growth and the ask of their customers, or whether you're like a cutting edge tech company, you need data. So everybody is going to be using a warehouse, or if they don't use a warehouse, they will be using a service that uses a warehouse behind the scene. And at that point, it's just how can we power like this massive change in the data and in the data space.
Personally, I would see you have the orchestration layer, so you can be Daxter, Prefect, Airflow. You'll have like several players there, as you do already. You have Airbyte, you have DBD, and then you have whatever tools you're using. Because in the end, if you enable to move your data from source A to destination B in the manner you want, batch, streaming, however you want, and in a commoditized way, at that point, A and B is kind of commoditized. If you're not happy with A, you can go to B very easily. So that's how I see like the data industry moving, and the place of Airbyte. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this kind of ties into this in terms of how big the landscape is, with the question that Derek asked in terms of your valuation is huge, considering that we achieved unicorn status very quickly with almost no revenue. How do you justify your current valuation? And yeah, how do you justify it?
I can start, Michel, and you can add.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say, so signups on Airbyte Cloud, lot, and the kind of ACVs that we're talking about. And just that it's not about just the ELT market. It's much more than the ELT industry. So that's it. So that's how, I think the TAM perceived is really huge. And right now we start to build this community. We have a great start. And with the community in open source, it's a winner take all, because there's a network effect. In the end, the more contributors you have, the more attractive you are to new contributors. So with this in mind, if we become like the leader of open source, any kind of data movement, and we have differentiators like long tail of connectors that nobody can reproduce, that means you can really become the leader of this market. And this market is huge. So that's why I think like the valuation made sense to the investors.
Mm-hmm. Yep, perfectly said.
Cool. Spencer asks, what were the biggest pushbacks or questions you heard from investors during the raise process?
So interestingly, all the investors we've talked to, they already knew us. They already had done a lot of work on Airbyte to understand like the market, the ecosystem. So in terms of pushback, I mean, obviously there is always, it could have been that the valuation is too high, but that was just, not a lot of pushback actually.
No.
Like questions was always about, what can be threats to Airbyte, how do you prove revenue? And at that point, it's really about the fact that we've already bootstrapped some of the revenue, and that also the numbers that we had for Airbyte Cloud. But that was pretty much it. John, anything you want to add?
I think we had one that asked about the multiples on revenues, and I would say that for us, okay, they don't understand open source, because with open source, because you've got so much inbound this community, if you manage to actually start converting companies, at that point your growth rate is crazy, like nothing compared to SaaS. So if you have an investor comparing you to SaaS metrics, at that point you understand that they don't understand open source, so it just wasn't the fit.
Yeah. I think Bessemer wrote a really good article about open source business and how they have this hockey stick shape, because it's about adoption, and then for people who want to have like a paid version, they generally convert after a few months, a few years, it depends, but what matters is adoption and really setting up the standard.
So I guess to clarify with Spencer's question, like since we didn't really get that much pushback, like how did we get into that position to not have much pushback? And the answer was basically setting up the open source model in this way.
So
I think it's just we have very strong numbers for open source, and we've always been very transparent to everybody, which was our focus is open source. Our focus is about growing adoption, growing the community, and our number, and that's what we've been really tracking with like very precisely. And at that point, it's either you understand how open source works or you don't. If you don't, that's okay. But if you do, then you understand that yes, we're in this hockey stick shape.
Actually, I love like Eric's question. What happens if Fivetran goes open source? So first, they don't have the DNA for that. Even if they do it, I don't think you cannot build a community without trust. I think what they've done is lose trust from their customers by changing pricing 4 times in 2 years, something like this. So I don't think they have the trust of the community to be successful at open source. So it won't be a right choice for them to do
that. Cool, makes sense. The next question in the chat asks, was there anything you did in your early days that was important when seeking project community fit or product market fit?
So the first thing we did, okay, go on, Michel.
There was one thing that someone told us, I forgot who it was, but they said, when you're doing open source, you need to accept the fact that you don't have visibility on how people use your product. and you don't have metrics about it. We did not accept that. And I think it's been very, it's been extremely good for us to not stick to this mantra, because it has actually allowed us to focus on what people needed faster, and it allowed us to just show adoption metrics, to show production deployment, etc. So that was one thing that was said that we did not believe, and we managed to do it another way, and that's very happy we did not do it.
I would add that for us, we started building from this Airbyte in the open. Like we still have one Slack. The whole team is in the Slack. We shared our learnings. We tried to be as transparent as possible because we understood that the opportunity we have with Airbyte is community powered, and you can only have community if you have the full trust of the community. So that's why, like, we're very transparent on anything on Airbyte. You can ask us anything, we try to answer if we can, mostly, and that is most often the case compared to other companies. So for us, like, trust was very important, and second would be how do we make the experience as easy as possible? It's not because it's open source that it should be difficult to use or beautiful to use, or like, so we treated that as a full-blown product for open source. And I think that drove word of mouth adoption, these kind of things, and trust.
Yeah. And so, sometimes you have companies who are relying on like the complexity of open source to sell cloud or to sell a paid version of it. For us, it was more about feature more than ease of use, the way we're thinking about it. And what John was saying during when we're showing the deck is everything that serves the need of a small team and individual should be open source. So basically everything that is core data movement, everything that is built on top of it becomes part of cloud. But it doesn't mean that ease of use and UX is not something that individual and small team work. So just to add to what John says, it was very, very important to us to have a very, very flawless experience there.
So we have the one question from Amit who asks the differentiators between other players in the space besides being open source. Would you say that was a kind of an answer to that question in terms of the ease of use and UX?
So it's actually like Michel's second slide, where we say, okay, first, they don't have you only use the current incumbents for the common APIs. As soon as you have some custom needs that is not covered by the extensibility features, which is most of the time the case, or long-tail connectors, or you have high volume databases, at that point, you don't use the solution. So you have to build that internally or use some contractor to build that for you. And that means that you have the choice that paying a lot for a current solution plus having internal data engineering teams and invest a lot to do that, or you just use Airbyte that does it all or with a few extra, and it makes things a lot easier. So that's why we're saying unifying data pipelines. We're unifying all data pipelines. All data pipelines in the end will be enabled by Airbyte. And this will not be the case for any other platform.
I guess going into the differences, how does the pricing compare with our competitors?
Yeah, so it's really, we're really looking at it as a consumption-based model. And one of the things that we're looking at today is, for example, how much CPU is being used for a particular replication, or how much time is used for a specific replication. And by thinking about it this way, you see that it's a very nice proxy to the value that you provide to users. So an API that might be very slow, might have very little data, but very precious data, will take more time to replicate data, but at the same time, you will extract a lot of value from that data. And if it's not optimized for access. But if you're pulling data from, I don't know, a Kafka queue or a Postgre database, it's going to be high volume, but these sources have been optimized for fast access. So at that point, the processing time, like the consumption that you will have in terms of resources, is going to be lower because you don't have to wait. There's a lot of things that you don't need to do, and you can feed the data there. And that's one way when we're thinking about pricing, where we are looking at realigning like the low scale use cases and the high scale use cases. And it's also about aligning with the rest of the ecosystem, which is Snowflake's, BigQuery. They charge you on storage and compute. So if you don't compute your data, you just pay for storage. Here it's the same. If you disable a connection, I mean, you don't charge for it. If you replicate a lot of data, then yes, you're going to be paying more. But if your source is optimized for very, very fast access, it's going to be more efficient for you to pay for.
So we're coming up close on time, so we're going to answer a few more questions. If there's any outstanding questions, there's a lot of questions that we really want to answer. We're going to create a thread in the Airbyte Slack community. I really want to get to all of these, so I'll track all of them, and I'll make sure to try and get responses out to everyone that has asked questions. I apologize that we can get to everything, but we're going to try to do as many as possible. Siddharth actually asked a really interesting question. Do you ask for a specific sum in the pitch, or do you give a range? How do you come up with this if you give a specific number?
So we generally have a sense of it. But after that, yeah, it's based on how the conversation, we come with a baseline, and as always, you increase or you decrease your baseline based on what your plan looks like. I mean, it's about building an organization, so planning how you're going to be spending that money, and then just making sure that you do what's best for the company. And doing a fundraising, it takes a lot of time, a lot of mental energy, so you don't want to do too many of these. So if you can reduce the number you have to do, that's better for your company. John?
I would just add that your VCs also help you identify what the baseline could be.
Cool. So there's one question that's been asked a lot, so I want to get to that. Reverse ETL. What's the plans with reverse ETL? How does the roadmap look like? Will it build on DBT? And how will it be different from Fivetran? I also assume they are asking about how it will be different from like High Touch or Census as well.
For number one, I'm not sure what build on DBT means, but just to it's for reverse ETL.
Yeah.
I think at that point it's really focusing on the physical pipes, which is all the intricacies that exist in connecting and managing a particular API should be what we focus on. Now, everything that is about, I don't know, like doing identity resolution or like merging data sets together, creating personas or people profile within your data warehouse to do segmentation or whatever. This should be either, that's not something we're looking to do. We're really here to focus on the pipes and solving the complexity of these APIs. One way we would be, we could be doing it is, yes, DBT is a very important piece of it, which is you have an input schema, you have an output schema that is going to go to Salesforce. Then you need something to transform in the middle. At that point, it's not really our decision to make. It's like the company's decision to make on how do they want to convert from one schema to the next. Maybe there will be some helpers. Today, we are integrating with DBT to help people cascade their transformation after the replication is done. But I think it's a focus on pipes, not so much on what happens in the middle.
Cool. If there's time for one last question, I'd like to squeeze it in. If not, we can move it to the thread. But we'll just go for it. How stable is the connector framework, and how to best stay in the loop of new features and breaking changes without watching Slack daily?
John, you want to talk about it?
So this is something that we're actually working on right now, like giving more transparency, all its reliability features, quality features. That's a lot of the focus of the company, where we have a lot of So we've got 164 connectors in 16 months. So that's pretty fast. So there's no magic here where there needs to be some focus on reliability and stability and quality of connectors. And that's what the team is doing today. So there will be a lot of update on that in the coming months, weeks and months.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for asking questions. There's so many questions. I'll make sure that we open a thread in the community. Thank you so much, John and Michel. This was a really informative presentation, and this will be available to everyone. The VOD, if you joined late or if you want to pass this on to anyone, we're going to upload this to YouTube. And so we're going to be posting this on our socials. We're going to be posting this in the Airbyte Slack community. If you're not already in that, make sure to go to the Airbyte website and join the Slack community. And you'll be able to find not only all of our decks, so the seed deck, the Series A deck, and the public Series B deck, and we'll be able to find this presentation as well. So thank you again, everyone, for coming.